The dead were loudest on the longest night of the year, and on the longest night of that year I had stopped pretending I could sleep. I sat in the high seat of my own hall and listened to them, the way a man listens to rain he can do nothing about. The sound came up through the black stone of Viharholm from somewhere under the mountain. A thin, layered wailing, dozens of voices that never quite became words, rising when the wind rose and sinking when it fell, but never stopping. It had not stopped in 11 years. Not for a feast, not for a birth, not for the coldest dark of midwinter when even the wolves went quiet. My people had learned to talk over it. I had learned to rule over it. Neither of us had learned to bear it. "They're worse tonight," my steward said. Old Bram stood at my shoulder with a cup he knew I would not drink. His hands were not steady anymore. "The barrow field's full of them. The watchman won't walk the wall past the second bell. Then post them inside the second bell." I did not look at him. No man freezes at his post because the dead are grieving. The dead have grieved every night of his life. Aldrich, he used my name, not my title, the way only 3 living people dared to. 100 years my family has kept this hall, and I have never heard them like this. It's as if they know something's coming. I almost laughed. The dead of Viharholm always sounded as if they knew something was coming. That was the whole cruelty of it, that they went on wanting, and could not say what for, and no priest from the low country and no moon elder from the far reaches had ever been able to tell me. 11 years I had buried them right. 11 years I had raised the barrows with my own hands, sung the old severing rites until my voice gave out, laid the iron and the salt and the winter flowers exactly as the elders swore. 11 years the wailing had answered me like a wound that would not close. The great doors at the far end of the hall boomed once. Not a knock, the fist of the wind. Then, a breath later, a knock after all. Small. 3 raps low on the wood, the way a child knocks who has been told to be polite at a stranger's door. Bram frowned. "No one comes to Viharholm on the longest night." "Someone has." I was already on my feet. The men at the doors dragged them open against the gale, and the cold came in like a living thing, and the wailing came in louder with it. And there on the threshold, snow to her knees and a dead man's satchel over her shoulder, stood a woman I had never seen. She was not what a man expects at his gate in a killing wind. She was small and plain-cloaked and soaked through, her dark hair frozen at the ends, her face raw with cold, and she was calm. That was the thing I marked before I marked anything else. Every soul who came to Viharholm and heard what lived under it did one of 2 things. They flinched or they pretended not to hear. She did neither. She stood in my doorway with the dead screaming up out of the stone beneath her boots, and she tilted her head, and she listened to them, the way you listen to someone speaking in the next room whose words you almost know. "You hear that?" I said. It was not a question. In 11 years I had never once said it aloud to a stranger. "I've heard it since the valley road," she said. Her voice was low and even. "I thought it was the wind at first. It isn't the wind." "No," I said, "it isn't." She looked past me down the length of the hall, at the fire and the men and the high seat, and then back to me, and I watched her understand who I was without being told. She did not bow the way the low country folk bowed, all fear and elbows. She inclined her head once, the way you salute something old. "I've come for the grave-warden's post," she said. "My father held it, warden call. He died at the turn of autumn, and the reeve at the crossing said Viharholm hadn't sent for a new one, so I came before you had to." She shifted the satchel on her shoulder. "I know it isn't a thing a hold usually gives a woman. But I know the rights better than any man you'll find, and I'll keep your dead as clean as my father did. And I don't." She stopped, and for the first time something moved in her steady face, something that was almost a private grief of her own. "I don't mind them the way most do." Warden Call. I knew the name. A quiet man of the far barrows who had come to Viharholm every second spring to teach my grave hands the proper severing and had gone home again saying nothing, keeping nothing, wanting nothing. A good man in a trade no one wanted. I had not known he had a daughter. I had not known he had died. Calls girl, Bram breathed behind me. By the moon, you've his eyes. Neve, she said, my name is Neve. And then, because I had still not moved, and because the cold was pouring past me into my own hall, she added gently, as if I were the one who needed steadying. You'll want to shut the door, my lord. You're letting the warm out, and they don't like the cold. They get louder in it. They don't like the cold. No priest had ever told me that. No elder in 11 years. This soaked, plain, unafraid woman said it as if it were the most ordinary knowledge in the world, as if of course the dead of Viharholm had preferences, as if of course a person could simply know them. And I stood there in the doorway of the hall I had ruled for a decade and felt, for the first time in longer than I could name, that I was standing in front of someone who understood my house better than I did. I shut the door. I did not know yet what she was. I did not know yet what I was to her. I only knew that when she stepped fully inside and stamped the snow from her boots and the wailing under the stone shifted. I swear it shifted. A half-tone lower. The way a room of quarreling voices drops when a mother enters, every hair on my body rose, and something long asleep in the center of my chest turned over once, and I did not understand it, and I was afraid to. I gave her Call's old cell by the barrow gate that first night, and I told myself it was because it was the warden's cell, and she was the warden, and not because I did not want to send her away to the far end of the hall where I could not have said why it mattered whether I could reach her quickly. I did not sleep. I never slept well, but that night I did not sleep at all, and it was not the wailing that kept me. It was the quiet under it. She had been right, they were louder in the cold, but there was, that night, threaded through the grief, a new note I had never heard in 11 years. Not louder, calmer. As if somewhere down in the dark under my mountain, some of the dead had stopped straining toward the door and had turned instead to listen to something inside the walls. To listen to her. By the gray of what passed for morning in the deep of winter, I was at the barrow gate. She was already up. Of course she was already up. She had a small fire going in the warden's yard, and she was sorting her dead father's tools on a stone bench, the iron severing blade, the salt horn, the little bone flute the wardens used to call the rights, the winter flower seed she would have to coax to bloom in the frozen barrow field by some art I did not know. She worked the way her father had worked, I thought, quietly, thoroughly, wanting nothing. You didn't sleep, she said without looking up. I don't sleep. No. She set down the salt horn and looked at me then, and there was no fear in it and no flattery either, only that steady grave attention, as if I were a thing she had been sent to tend. You wouldn't, not with them like this. She nodded toward the barrowfield beyond the gate, where the long, low mounds of my pack's dead lay under the snow, 300 years of them, and the wailing rose off the field in the morning cold like steam off water. How long have they been unquiet, my lord? 11 years. I heard my own voice go rough on it. Since I stopped, I did not tell strangers, I did not tell anyone. She waited. She did not push. That too was new. Everyone pushed. Everyone had a right to sell me or a blame to lay. The low country priests who said I had angered the old moon. The moon elders who said the priests had. The pack itself who said, in the years right after, that their alpha had done something the dead could not forgive. She only waited, and the waiting was so patient and so unfrightened that the words came up out of me before I had decided to let them. 11 years ago there was a sickness in the hold, I said. A winter fever. It took. The number still stopped my breath. It took 91 of my people in 40 days. Elders, warriors, children. I looked at the barrows. There was no time to bury them right. The ground was iron. The fever was still in the halls. We burned some. We laid others in a single trench and raised the barrows over them after the thaw all together, with the severing rites said over the lot at once because there were too many to say them one by one. My hands had closed into fists at my sides. The wailing began the spring the barrow settled, and it has never stopped, and I have said the rites over them again one by one, every one of the 91 on my knees in the frozen field, and it has never stopped. I made myself unclench my hands. So, that is how long they have been unquiet. 11 years. And you are the first person in 11 years to walk into my hall and not flinch. So I will ask you plainly, warden's daughter, what do you know that 100 priests do not? She was quiet a long moment. The fire snapped between us. I know they're not angry, she said finally. Everyone comes here thinking they're angry. The priests come with iron and severing because they think the dead of Viharhom are wrathful that you wronged them, laying them all in together, and they scream to punish you. She shook her head slowly. They're not screaming to punish you, my lord. That's why the severing never works. You keep cutting a cord that isn't a chain. She looked up at me, and something in her plain face was suddenly, quietly, almost unbearably kind. They're not screaming at you. They're calling. You laid 91 of them down together in the dark in a hurry, in fear, with no one to name them each by their own name and send them each to their own rest. And they've been down there 11 years, all tangled up together, none of them able to find their own way out because no one ever separated one grief from another. She spread her frost-cracked hands. They're not haunting you. They're lost. And they're calling because they're waiting for someone to come down into the dark and call them each home by name. I could not speak. 11 years. 11 years of priests and iron and severing and salt. 11 years of being told my dead were wrathful, that my hold was cursed, that I had done a black thing in the fever winter that the earth would not forgive. And this soaked plain girl who had walked in out of the snow the night before looked at the barrow field where the voices rose and said, without cruelty, without art, they're lost, and they're waiting for someone to call them home. And can you, I said when I could say anything at all, call them home? She looked at the field for a long time. When she answered, her voice had gone very careful, the way a person's voice goes when they are standing at the edge of a thing they have spent their whole life not saying out loud. My father could quiet one, she said. A single grave said write one name at a time. That's the warden's craft. That's what I came to do for you, one a night, 91 nights, and by spring maybe your hall would be quiet. She wet her lips. But there were things my father could do that he made me swear never to speak of, because the low country burns what it can't explain. And there were things my mother's line could do that my father was afraid of, and that he made me swear never to do at all. She looked at me, and there was fear in her face now at last, not fear of the dead, but fear of me, of what I might do with what she was about to give me. I don't know if I can do the thing you're asking, my lord. I've never tried. I promised I never would. But I know that I'm the first person who's walked into this hold in 11 years and heard what they're actually saying. She swallowed. So I think I might be the only one who can. The wailing rose off the field between us. And for the first time in 11 years, standing beside her at the barrow gate, I did not hear it as an accusation. I heard it, as she'd said, as a calling, and under the calling, faint, where her voice had made a small, still place in the noise, I heard something I had stopped believing my hall contained. I heard the dead beginning, just a little, to hope. She started that same day, with one grave. I told her she need not begin so soon, that she was half frozen and grief-worn and newly widowed of her father, and she looked at me as though I had said something in a language she did not speak, and said, "They've waited 11 years, my lord. I'll not make one of them wait a day longer than I have to." And she took up her father's bone flute and her salt horn and her little pouch of winter flower seed, and went out into the barrow field alone, and knelt at the first low mound. And I stood at the gate because she had not told me to go, and I could not have made myself. I do not have the words for what she did. I am an Alpha King. I know battle craft and pack law and the weight of a crown. I do not know the craft of the dead. But I watched her clear the snow from the barrow stone with her bare hands, and lay the salt in a line and coax, by breathing on it. By some patience I could not follow, a single winter flower to open white out of the frozen seed against all the law of the season. And then she bent her head to the stone, and she did not sing the severing rite the priests sang, the cutting rite, the rite I had said on my knees 1,000 nights. She sang something older and lower and unbearably gentle, and it was not a cutting at all. It was a nomming. I could not hear the name, but I heard the shape of it. I heard her ask the stone a question, soft, the way you'd wake a sleeper you loved, and I heard her wait, and I heard her answer come, and I heard her say the answer back once, cradling it, the way you say a child's name to call them in from the dark. And out of the whole vast tangle of wailing that rose off the field, one voice, one lifted and turned and found her. I heard it recognize its own name. I heard it after 11 years lost in the dark under my mountain, tangled with 90 others, alone and calling and afraid. I heard it remember who it was. And then it went quiet. Not cut, not severed, not driven off. Quiet the way a frightened child goes quiet in the moment it is lifted and held and told at last that it is found. One voice out of 91 went home, and the wailing off the field was exactly as loud as before, 90 voices instead of 91, and no one but me could have told the difference. But I could tell the difference. I stood at the barrow gate with tears freezing on a face that had not wept in 11 years, and I could tell the difference, because, for the first time since the fever winter, one of my dead was at rest. She stayed kneeling at the stone a long while after. When she finally rose, she was gray with exhaustion, swaying, and I crossed the field to her before I knew I had moved and caught her arm to steady her, and the moment my hand closed on her. I have tried many times since to say what happened in that moment, and I have never found the words that hold it. Something in the center of my chest, the old dead thing that had turned over once the night she came, woke. A warmth spread out from beneath my breastbone as if a coal long buried in ash had been breathed back to life, and it ran down my arm to the hand that held her, and I felt foolish, impossible, undeniable. I felt found, the way I had just heard that one lost voice find her, as if I too had been calling in the dark for 11 years without knowing it, and had just for the first time heard my own name said back. She had gone very still under my hand. She was staring at my chest, at the place under my furs where the warmth had bloomed, and her frost-cracked lips had parted, and the exhaustion had fallen off her face and left something raw and disbelieving in its place. "You felt that," I said. "My lord," she whispered, "your mark is waking." I did not know what she meant. My mark had never woken. An Alpha King's mate mark sleeps under his heart until the one it was made for stands before him, so the old tales say, and I had ruled Vihar home 20 years and never felt it stir, and had long since made my peace with a mateless crown, because what woman would come to a haunted hold and love a sleepless king whose own dead would not let him rest? I had stopped waiting for it the way I had stopped waiting for silence. And now it was warm under my hand where I held her, and warm under her eyes where she stared, and the two of us stood in the middle of a field of the wailing dead in the killing cold, and neither of us said the word, because the word was too large, and because she was a grave-warden come for a post, and I was a king with a curse, and because if it was true then, everything was about to become both wonderful and terrible at once. "Come inside," I said. My voice was not steady. "You're frozen, you've given enough today." "One," she said. There was despair in it and there was iron in it both. "One, my lord, out of 91, and it near unmade me." She looked out at the field, at the mounds under the snow, at 11 years of my grieving pack. "One a night, the warden's way, that's 90 more nights." "And I don't," she caught herself, "but I heard the rest of it anyway. I don't know if I have 90 nights of that in me." "Then we go one a night," I said, "for as long as it takes, and not a grave faster than you can bear." I still had not let go of her arm. The warmth under my heart had not faded. "You are not spending yourself to the bone in my service, warden. I've buried 91 of my people. I'll not add the woman who came to save the last of them." She looked up at me, startled, and I understood from the startlement that no one had said such a thing to her in a long time, that she had come north expecting to be used the way the low country used those who tend the dead, needed and feared and thanked and forgotten, not protected, not held out of harm by a king who had known her one day. "You don't know what I am yet, my lord," she said quietly. "You might not want to protect me when you do." "I know you walked into my hall and did not flinch," I said. "I know you knelt in the frozen dark and gave one of my dead his name back after 11 years. I know my mark woke when I touched you, and it has not woken in 20 years of my life. I let go of her arm gently because a king does not hold a woman who has not said he may. I don't need to know the rest to know I'll not let you be harmed. But you'll tell me the rest, Neve. Tonight, by the fire where it's warm and they're quieter. I almost smiled. I had not almost smiled in a long time. They're quieter where you are. Did you know that? The whole hall they drop when you walk in, as if they're listening to you instead of calling. Something crossed her face, hope and dread braided together. Yes, she said, I know, they've done it my whole life. She pulled her cloak tighter. That's the part my father made me swear never to speak of. She told me by the fire that night, and I will set it down the way she told it, because it is the heart of what she was, and a man should know the truth of the woman who saved his house. There's a line on my mother's side, she began. She sat on the bench nearest the hearth with a cup she actually drank, and I sat across from her, and the wailing was low and far off, gentled by her nearness the way the whole hall was gentled. The far-reach folk call them moon-callers, spirit speakers in the old tongue. Once my mother said every hold had won a woman who could hear the dead not as a wailing but as words and could call them each by their own name into their rest. Not sever them, call them. Lead them home like a woman leading children through the dark, one hand to the next. She turned the cup in her hands. It's why the barrows were never restless in the old days, not because the priests severed them right, because there was always a caller to walk them home. And the line failed, I said. The line was hunted, she said, and her voice went flat and careful again, the voice of old danger. The Low Country came 3, 4 generations back with its new priests and its iron severing and its fear of anything it couldn't rule. A woman who could speak to the dead, they called that witchcraft. They burned the callers, my lord, hold by hold. My mother's mother hid what she was and died pretending she couldn't hear a thing. My mother heard and hid it and married a grave warden of the far barrows precisely because a warden's wife has a reason to be near the dead, and no one asks why she's calm at a graveside. She looked up. And I've heard since I was a child. I heard the barrows of the far reach the way you'd hear a nursery full of crying, and I quieted them when no one was watching, one name at a time, because I couldn't bear to leave them crying. Her jaw tightened. And my father caught me at it when I was 9 years old, and he didn't burn me and he didn't fear me. He loved me too well for that. But he took me by the shoulders and he made me swear, on my mother's grave, that I would never do it where anyone could see. That I would be a warden's plain daughter who knew the rights and nothing more. Because the Low Country burns what it can't explain, and he had already buried my mother and would not bury me. The fire cracked, the dead murmured far and low. So you buried it, I said. The one gift that could quiet a haunted hold you buried, because a burning is what the world gives your kind. A slow cold anger was moving in me, not at her, never at her, at a Low Country that had murdered the very thing that could have healed 100 holds like mine. 90 of your kind burned, and 11 years of my dead screaming in the dark for want of a caller, and the two facts sit on the same shelf of the world, and no one ever put them side by side. No one ever does, my lord, she said softly. That's how it stays a curse. And your father made you swear never to do it where anyone could see. I met her eyes across the fire. You did it today, in my open field, with your king standing at the gate. She held my gaze. It cost her something. I could see it cost her something, but she held it. My father's dead now, she said. He can't be hurt by it any more. And I stood in your hall last night and heard 91 of your people calling in the dark, and I looked at a king who'd spent 11 years on his knees in a frozen field trying to give them rest with a right that was never going to work, trying and failing and trying again. 11 years of it, and I thought. Her voice caught and steadied. I thought, if I'm the last caller in the world and I let a whole hold of the lost keep crying because I'm afraid of a fire, then the Low Country won by burning us anyway. Then I'm as good as burned already. She set down the cup. So no, my lord, I won't be doing it where no one can see. I'll be doing it in your open field, one grave a night, until every one of your 91 is home. And if that damns me in the Low Country's eyes, then let it. I'd rather be damned for calling the lost home than safe for leaving them to cry. I have ruled warriors. I have stood among men who charged a shield wall and men who held a wall against fire, and men who gave their lives for the pack without a breath of hesitation. And I tell you that I have not, in all my years, seen courage plainer than a soaked grave-warden's daughter across my fire, deciding to do the one thing her murdered mother's murderers would burn her for, because a hold full of strangers was crying in the dark. The warmth under my heart, which had not left me since the field, pulsed once, bright like an answer. "You will not be burned," I said. It came out low and it came out absolute, the voice I used perhaps twice in a decade, the one my whole pack knew meant a thing was now iron law. "Hear me, Neve, Warden's daughter, caller of the far reach. You are under the protection of Viharhom and its Alpha King from this night. No priest of the low country, no elder, no man or woman living sets a hand or a word against you while you are mine to guard, and you are mine to guard the moment you knelt in my field. If the low country wants to burn a caller, it can come north and try it, and it can explain to my wolves why it's come." I leaned toward the fire, toward her. "You crossed a killing storm to give my dead their rest. You'll not spend one night of it afraid of a fire. That's over. That fear ends here." She stared at me. And then I had not expected it, and it undid me more than anything else that long, strange day had. Her steady, grave face broke, all at once, and she put her frost-cracked hands over it and wept. Not prettily, not the way the low-country ladies weep. She wept the way a person weeps who has been carrying a stone up a mountain their whole life, and has just, for the first time, been told they may set it down. Great ragged breaths of it, years of it, the fear of the fire and the grief of her mother, and the grief of her father, and the long cold loneliness of being the last of a hunted line. All of it coming out at once by my hearth, while the dead she'd come to save murmured low and gentle in the dark around us, as if they too were listening, as if they too were glad. I did not touch her. I wanted to. The mark under my heart strained toward her like a hound at a leash. But a king does not gather a weeping woman into his arms because his mark wills it, and she had said herself she did not yet know what she was to me, and I would not press one grain of my own want onto a woman who had just set down the weight of her whole life. So I only sat and let her weep and kept the fire high, and when the wailing rose a little in the cold, I said, "Lo, they don't like the cold, you told me that. Come nearer the fire." And she gave a wet, broken laugh at having her own words given back to her, and came nearer, and we sat by the hearth of my haunted hall a long time in a quiet that was, that night, almost peace. That was the first night I knew. I did not say the word, neither of us said the word for a long while yet, but I knew, sitting across a fire from a grave warden's daughter with tears drying on my own face, and a warmth alive under my heart that had slept 20 years. My mate had walked into Viharhom out of the snow on the longest night, carrying her dead father's tools, and she had come not to be claimed and not to be crowned, but to do the bravest and gentlest thing I had ever seen done, to go down into the dark, night after night, and call the lost ones home. And I, who had given up on silence and given up on rest and given up, most of all, on ever being anything to anyone but a grim king with a screaming hall. I began, that night, against all the long cold habit of my grief, to hope. Part 1 ends here, words. This covers the full first movement, the longest night, her arrival, the nomming of the first grave, the mark waking, and the opening of the second, her truth by the fire, his vow of protection. Say continue, and I'll write part 2 straight through. The deepening bond across the 90 nights, the low country coming north to burn her, the night the dead rise loudest, Neve calling all the remaining lost home at once as the mark fully wakes, the hold falling silent for the first time in a generation, and the tender, dignified ending, landing the full tilde 12, 765-word count. I'll drop both updated tracker rows at the very end once it's done. Continue architected narrative arc. Deepening bonds, supernatural escalation, climactic awakening, tender resolution. Architected narrative arc. Deepening bonds, supernatural escalation, climactic awakening, Tender Resolution Part 2. The 90 nights that followed were the strangest, and I have come to believe the best of my life, though they nearly killed us both. We fell into a rhythm without ever agreeing on one. Each dusk, when the light such as it was drained off the mountain and the cold came down hard, and the dead began to rise in their wailing, Neve went out into the barrow field with her father's tools, and she chose one grave, and she knelt at it and she called. And I went with her, not because she asked, for she never asked, but because on the second night I had watched her sway and gray and near fall into the snow when the calling was done. And I had decided that a caller who spent herself to the bone in my service would not do it alone in the dark with no one to carry her in. So I stood at the gate through each calling, close enough to reach her, and when it was finished and she rose swaying, I crossed the field and steadied her, and each time my mark woke warm under my heart at the touch of her, and each time neither of us named it, and each time it grew a little harder not to. I learned the shape of her craft, watching, though never the substance. I learned that some of my dead came easy, an old woman who had lived full and died only frightened, a warrior who wanted mostly to be told the pack had held, and some came terribly hard, tangled so deep in 11 years of the dark, and in one another that Neve knelt at a single stone until the moon crossed the whole sky, coaxing one lost voice free of 90, and rose from it barely able to stand. I learned that she wept at some of them and laughed, softly, at others. At a young man, she told me after, who had died mid-boast and gone into the dark still telling the story, and whom she had had to let finish his tale before he would consent to rest. I learned that she knew each of my dead by the end of their calling, better than I who had ruled them living, that she carried out of the field each night a little of who they had been, that she was, grave by grave, becoming the keeper of my whole pack's memory in a way no priest and no elder ever could. And I learned her. That is the truth of those 90 nights, under the truth of the calling. I learned Neve. I learned that she took her tea too hot and always burned her tongue and never learned. I learned that she hummed without knowing it when she worked, lo, the ghost of the calling song. I learned that she was fierce about small injustices and calm about large ones, that she could not abide a cruelly kept dog or a bullied kitchen boy, but faced a killing storm or a field of the wailing dead without a flicker. I learned that she had been lonely her whole life. The hidden are always lonely, and that she did not know what to do with kindness, that she flinched from it at first the way other folk flinched from the dead, and then, slowly over the nights, learned to let it near her. I learned to make her laugh. I had not made anyone laugh in 11 years. I found I would have upended my whole grim kingdom for the sound of it. The hall changed around us as the graves went quiet. My people are not fools. They marked it. By the 20th night the watchmen were walking the full wall again, past the second bell, because the wailing had thinned enough that a man could bear it. By the 40th night old Bram wept openly at his own hearth to hear the dark under the mountain gone half silent for the first time in his long service. By the 60th night the pack had stopped speaking of Neve as the new warden and begun speaking of her as the caller, in the low, reverent way you name a thing you had thought lost from the world. And they had stopped, I noticed, meeting my eyes and looking quickly away when she and I stood near, and begun instead to smile, small and knowing, the way a pack smiles when it has understood something about its alpha before he has finished understanding it himself. They knew before I said it. They knew before she said it. The whole hold of Viharholm watched its grim, sleepless king walk out each night to stand guard over a grave-warden's daughter, and watched him carry her in half-fainting when the calling was done, and watched the warmth come back into a face that had been winter for 11 years, and they knew. It was on the 70th night that the Low Country came. They came the way that kind always comes, with torches and with certainty, and with a priest at the front of them who had never in his life been afraid of anything he could burn. I was at the gate. Neve was in the field, deep in a hard calling, kneeling at the grave of a woman who had died with a child unborn and would not go into her rest until Neve had, somehow, by some grace I will never understand, convinced her that the child had lived, for it had. It was grown now, a grave hand in my own yard, and I would not have interrupted that calling for my own death. So when the torchlight came up the valley road and resolved into a column of low country men, 30 or 40 of them, cudgels and iron and one tall priest in the gray robes of the Severing order, I stepped out from the gate alone and put myself between them and the field, and I did not call my wolves, not yet, because a king does not loose his pack until he has first offered the choosing. "You're a long way north," I said, "and past the hour when honest travelers knock." The priest stopped his column with a raised hand. He was younger than I expected and colder than I expected, with the smooth, unbothered face of a man who has decided that his certainty is the same thing as goodness. "Alpha King Aldrich V. Harn," he said, "we've no quarrel with you or your hold. We've come for the witch you're harboring." He said it mildly as a fact, as a thing already settled. "Word came south that a caller works openly in your barrow field, a spirit speaker of the burned line. The order doesn't suffer a caller to live, my lord. You know the law. Give her to us and we'll trouble your hall no further." Behind me, faint on the cold air, I could hear Neve's voice in the field, low and unbroken, still calling the lost woman home, not knowing yet that death had walked up the valley road for her. And something happened in me then that I had not felt in 11 years. Not the gray grief that had been my whole weather, but heat, clean and total, the old alpha fire I had thought the fever winter had put out for good. "Let me be certain I've understood you," I said, and I heard my own voice drop into the iron register, and I saw the men behind the priest shift, because wolves know that register even when men don't. "You've walked 40 men and a fistful of torches into the Nightreach, onto the ground of Viharholm, to take a woman out of my field and burn her. A woman who has spent 70 nights on her knees in my frozen barrows giving rest to 91 of my dead that your order's severing rites could not touch in 11 years. I took one step toward him. "Your rites, priest, I said them myself, 1,000 nights exactly as your order taught, and they never quieted a single grave. She has quieted 70. Another step. And you've come to burn her for it." "The end doesn't sanctify the means, my lord," the priest said, but there was the first thread of unease in it now. "What she does is against the—" "You will not finish that sentence on my ground." I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. Hear me, and hear me the once, because I'll not say it twice, and I'll not say it kindly. "That woman is Neve, warden of Viharholm, caller of the far reach, and she is under my protection and the protection of my pack, sworn and absolute, and there is no law of your low country that runs north of the valley crossing, and no order of your severing priests that outranks the word of the Alpha King on his own stone." I let them see then, the first of it, the amber coming up in my eyes, the low sound rolling out of the dark behind me where my wolves had gathered without a word from me, drawn by their king's fire, a ring of them at the gate now, eyes like coals in the torchlight. "You came to burn the last caller in the world for the crime of giving the dead their rest. I am going to give you until I finish speaking to turn around and walk back down that road. And if you are still on my ground when I finish," I smiled, and I saw the priest go white because it was not a kind smile, "then I will let my dead decide what's done with you. They've 11 years of grief to spend, and they are not, whatever your order taught you, gentle with the men who'd burn the one soul who came to help them." It was a bluff, and it was not a bluff. The dead of Viharholm did not obey me, but the priest did not know that, and 40 low country men with torches, standing on ground where the wailing rose off the field around them, 90 graves of the unquiet dead at their backs, and a ring of wolves at their front, and a king with fire in his eyes between 40 men in that place, do not stay to test whether the Alpha is bluffing about the dead. They went. The priest went last, walking backward a few steps, and he said, "This isn't the end of it, Viharn, the order will." And I took one more step and let the growl out full, and he turned and went like the rest, torchlight streaming back down the valley road into the dark, and I stood at my gate until the last of it was gone, and the cold had swallowed the sound of their retreat. When I turned, Neve was standing in the field. The calling was finished, the lost woman was home. I could hear it in the field's new quiet, one more voice gone to rest, and Neve was on her feet, swaying with the spentness of it, and she had seen. She had seen all of it. She was staring at me across the snow with her face wide open, and there was such a thing in it, such disbelief, such a terrible, fragile, dawning hope, that I crossed the field to her without a word, and this time when I reached her, I did not merely steady her arm. I took her hands, both of them, her frost-cracked, calling hands in mine. "You heard," I said. "You stood between me and the fire," she whispered. "You, my lord, they were 40 men and a severing priest, and you stood in front of them alone and told them they'd have to burn you first." Her hands were shaking in mine, and not from the cold. "No one has ever, my whole life, my father hid me, my mother died hiding. Everyone who ever loved me protected me by making me small, by making me swear to never be what I am, and you stood at your own gate and told the world to come north and try it." A tear cut down through the frost on her cheek. "You made me bigger. You told them what I am, in front of your whole hold, as if it were a thing to be proud of. As if I were. As if you were the bravest soul in the Nightreach," I said, "and the finest thing that ever walked into my hall, and the woman my Mark woke for after 20 years of sleep, and mine to protect against the whole low country and every priest it can raise. Because you are all of those things, Neve, and I am done pretending I don't know it." The warmth under my heart was blazing now, and I could see in her face that she felt it too, that it was answering across the small space between us, marked to caller, the bond that had been quietly waking for 70 nights. "I said we'd not name it until you knew what you were to me. You've known for a while, I think. I've known since the first night." I lifted one of her hands and pressed it flat to my chest, over the warmth, over the waking mark, and I felt her breath catch as her palm met the heat of it. "There, that's yours. It slept 20 years and woke for a grave-warden's daughter who walked out of a storm to call my dead home. If you'll have a grim, sleepless king with a hall that's only half quiet, I'm yours and you're mine, and the whole world can come north and argue it if it likes." She looked at her own hand on my chest. She looked up at me, and the steady grave face that had not flinched at 40 men with torches, the face that faced the wailing dead each night without a tremor, that face crumpled at last, not in fear and not in grief, but in something I had no name for until I saw it there, plain and shining and undone. Joy. The joy of the hidden finally seen. The joy of the last of a hunted line finding, at the far cold edge of the world, in the one hold no one else would come to, a place where what she was made her not a witch to be burned but a queen to be crowned. "Yes," she said, "yes, you grim, impossible king, yes." And she laughed that laugh I would have upended a kingdom for, wet and cracked and helpless. "I came for a post. I came to quiet your graves one a night and go home in the spring. And you. And I'm keeping you," I said, "and your graves and your gift and your whole hunted line, right here in the light where no one will ever make you small again." And there in the middle of the barrow field, with 90 of my dead at rest and one still to go, and the cold coming down hard and the mark alive between us, I bent and I kissed her, gentle, the way you touch a thing you have waited your whole life for and will not now rush. And the wailing off the last grave dropped low and soft around us. And I swear Neve swears it too, and she would know I swear the last of the dead were glad. There was one grave left. We had known for some nights that it would be the worst. Neve had felt it each time she passed it, a knot at the very center of the barrow field, a grave that would not answer even the edges of her calling, a place where the tangle of the fever winter's dead was wound so tight around a single lost voice that she could not draw near it grave by grave. It was, she said, the first of them, the very first of the 91 to go into the dark in the worst of the fever, when the trench was fresh and the panic highest and the severing said fastest and least careful of all. It had been down there longest. It was most lost. And all the others, freed now, had drawn back from it in the dark, as the living draw back from a grief too large to touch, and left it alone at the center. "I can't call it grave by grave," Neve told me, the night after the low country fled, standing at the edge of the field with her father's tools in her hands and the single last voice wailing thin and terrible out of the center of the barrows. It's too deep. It's been down there 11 years alone, longest of all, and it stopped believing anyone's coming. I can't coax it out one thread at a time. It won't answer a small voice anymore. She turned to me, and there was fear in her face, real fear. The first true fear I had seen in her since the night by the fire when she'd feared what I might do with her secret. There's a thing my mother's line could do. The old callers in the days when there was one to a hold. Not a single nomming, a great calling. You open yourself to the whole field at once, every voice, and you don't lead one home. She searched for it, you become the door. You stand at the center and you open, and every lost thing that's ready pours through you at once into its rest, all of them in one breath. Her hands tightened on the flute. My mother did it once. In the far reach, a plague field, 40 at a time. She did it and it, Neve stopped. It what? I said, though I already knew from her face and hated it. It near killed her, Neve said quietly. A great calling takes everything. You hold every voice at once, all their grief, all their fear, 11 years of it, and it goes through you. And if you're not strong enough or not anchored enough, it takes you with it. My mother had my father to anchor her. He held her body while her voice went into the field, and he called her back after by her name, the way she was calling the dead. That's the only reason she came home from it. She met my eyes. The last grave won't come to a small calling. I'll have to do the great one. And there's no one. She stopped again. There's me, I said. Aldrich. There's me, I said again, and I took the flute out of her hands and set it aside and took both her hands in both of mine. Your mother had your father to anchor her and call her back. You have your king, whose mark is bound to you, whose whole self is bound to you, who could find you in any dark that ever was, because you're written under my heart now in a warmth that will not go out. I pressed her hands to my chest, to the mark, and it flared under her touch, bright and sure. You will not do it alone. You will never again do anything alone. That's what the mark means, Neve. It means there is one soul in the world tied to yours who will hold your body while your voice goes into the dark and call you home after by your name and not let go, not ever, not if the whole field of the dead pulls the other way. Do the great calling. Free the last of my people. And trust the mark to bring you back. Trust me to bring you back. My voice roughened. I've buried 91 of my people. I will not bury the 92nd, and I will not bury you. Anchor to the mark and go. I'll hold. I swear it on every grave in this field. I'll hold, and I'll call you home. She searched my face a long moment, and then the fear went out of it, not because the danger was less, but because she had decided to trust the thing under my heart, and she nodded once, and we walked out together to the center of the barrow field, to the last and worst and most lost of my dead, on the coldest, deepest hour of that long winter's darkest night. I will tell it as plainly as I can, though there are no plain words for it. She knelt at the center grave, and I knelt behind her, and I wrapped my arms around her from behind and pressed my chest to her back so that the mark under my heart lay against her spine, and I locked my hands over her heart, and I set my will like a mooring stone. I have you, I said against her hair. Go, I have you. And Neve opened. I felt it happen. I felt her open, felt something in her unlatch that she had kept shut and hidden and small her whole hunted life. Every door her father had made her swear to keep closed, all of them flung wide at once, and I felt the field pour into her. All of it. Every remaining grief in the dark under my mountain. 11 years of the last lost voices, terror and loneliness and slow forgetting. All of it rushing up out of the frozen ground and into the small, brave body in my arms. And I felt her begin to go with it. Felt her spirit lean out toward the dark the way a caller must. Out over the edge of the world after the lost thing to lead it home. And I held her body against the pull. I locked my will to the mark and the mark to her and her to the anchor of my arms, and when the last lost voice caught her and tried to take her with it into the rest, because it was so alone, that voice, so long alone, that when at last someone came it did not want to go home, it wanted to keep her, to not be alone in the dark even one moment more. When it wound itself around her spirit and pulled, I put my mouth to her ear and I called her home the way she called the dead. I said her name. I said it low and I said it sure and I said it with the whole waking fire of the mark behind it. Neve, not a plea, a calling. Neve. Neve of the far reach, warden of Viharholm, mine, come home. You've led them out. Now come home, Neve, come home to me. And out in the field all at once in one vast breath, 91 no, the last one. The last lost voice, and with it the last shreds of all the others, every remnant of 11 years of grief that had soaked into that black stone, all of it lifted at once through her, through the door she had made of herself and went home. I felt it pass through her and through me both, a great warm rush of released grief, and then silence, silence. For the first time in 11 years, the dark under the mountain of Viharholm was silent. No wailing, no calling, no thin, terrible keening on the wind. The barrowfield lay under the snow in the deepest hour of the longest dark, and it was quiet, the deep good quiet of the truly resting dead, 91 souls home at last, each called by name into their own rest by the last caller in the world. And in my arms Neve had gone limp. For one moment I will feel in my bones until I die, I thought I had lost her. I thought the great calling had taken her after all, that the last voice had won, that I had held and called and it had not been enough, and that I would rise from that field with the woman my mark woke for gone cold in my arms, the 92nd grave I had sworn I would not dig. The fire under my heart guttered toward panic. And then I remembered I was her anchor, and an anchor does not panic. An anchor holds. Eve, I said again into her hair, and I poured the whole of the mark into it, the whole of what she was to me, 20 years of waiting and 70 nights of learning her and one whole life's worth of love I had thought the fever winter had frozen out of me for good. Neve, you led them all home, everyone. The field is silent, you did it, you brave, impossible woman, you did what no priest in 11 years could do. Now do one more thing. Come home. Follow my voice the way they followed yours. I'm right here. I'm holding you. The mark's a light and it's calling you and it will not let you go into that dark. Neve, come home to me. And she drew breath. She drew a great shuddering breath against my locked arms, and her heart kicked back to its beat under my hands, and the warmth of the mark surged up bright between my chest and her spine as the bond snapped taut and whole and both ways alive for the first time. And Neve of the far reach came home out of the dark, called by name, held by her anchor, the way she had brought 91 of my dead home, the way she would have wanted to be brought home herself. She turned in my arms. Her face was gray and spent and streaked with the cold, and her eyes when they found mine were dazed with how far she had been, and then they cleared, and she heard it, the thing I was already weeping at, the thing 11 years of my life had been shaped by the absence of. The silence. They're home, she whispered. Aldrich, do you hear it? There, and she could not finish, because she was weeping too, and I gathered her up off the frozen ground and into my arms at last, all of her, and held her against my chest with the silent barrows around us and the silent dark below us and the snow coming down soft and clean out of a sky that had, I only then noticed, gone clear. The first clear sky over Viharholm in the whole of that long winter. The stars out hard and bright over a hold that was, after 11 years, finally wholly at rest. We were wed at the first thaw, in the barrowfield, which some thought strange and I thought only right. For it was there she had come to me out of the storm, and there she had knelt night after night to call my people home, and there the silence had come at last, and I would speak my vows to her on no ground but the ground she had healed. The whole hold came, and the far-reach folk came too, the scattered remnant of the hidden, called north by a word Neve sent out into the world once she no longer had to hide. There is a hold in the night-reach where a caller is a queen and not a witch. Come, you need not be small here, and some of them came, wary and hunted and disbelieving, and found it was true and stayed. Viharholm became, in the years after, a refuge for the last of the burned line, the one place under the cold northern stars where a woman who could hear the dead could say so aloud and be honored for it. The low country sent its priests to argue it, once or twice more. My wolves saw them to the crossing. they stopped coming. I would tell you that Neve laid down her calling after that night, that she had done enough, that I wrapped her in furs and kept her by the fire, and never let her spend herself in the frozen dark again. But you have met her now in this telling, and you know she would no more lay it down than she would stop breathing. She is the caller of Vihar home still. When one of my people dies, she goes to them, and she names them, and she leads them home, one at a time now, gently, in a field that stays quiet because there is a caller in it again, the way the old hold stayed quiet before the low country burned that mercy out of the world. Our own daughters we have too, and they have their mother's eyes, and the elder one, I think, their mother's ear, walk the field with her sometimes, learning the old craft that will not die out now, not here, not while Vihar home stands. I do not tell this story often, but you ask me why the Alpha King of the Nightreach, who is said to be grim, sits some nights at the edge of the barrow field in the cold and smiles at nothing. So I have told you. I sit there because it is quiet, because 91 of my people rest under that snow with their own names said over them by the last caller in the world, and because that caller is my wife, and because there was a winter 11 years long, when I did not believe silence would ever come to my hall again. And then a grave-warden's daughter knocked at my door on the longest night, 3 small raps low on the wood, and listened to my dead instead of fearing them, and told me they were not angry, only lost, only waiting for someone brave enough to come down into the dark and call them home. I sit in the quiet she made, and I listen to the nothing where 11 years of grief used to be, and I think, of all the things a king can leave his people, I have left them this. Not a conquest, not a wall, a silence, a rest, a caller in the field who will not let them go into the dark alone. And then the cold gets into my old bones, and I hear her voice from the hall behind me. Aldrich, you grim, impossible man, come in. You're letting the warm out, my own first words to her, given back to me every night of my life now like a small warm coal I get to keep. And I go in. And the door closes on the warm, bright hall, and behind it the field lies silent under the stars, 91 of my dead at rest, and the last caller in the world safe and honored by the fire, calling me by name home.